Rolling back sounds easy, right? Something breaks in production, right? You just redeploy to the previous version and everything goes back to normal. So, but here's the thing, right? A lot of engineering teams have been born by this assumption that whatever breaks, you can always roll back. And this is because, right, rolling back is not just about application code, right? It's about your database, your internal dependencies. It's about your variables. It's about your configurations. And like in our ever-changing software architecture landscape, right, with microservices, Kubernetes, you have a YAML here, YAML that, right? It's not just application code. By the end of this video, you know how redeploy works in Octopus, when it's safe to use, right? And when it's better to fix forward instead. So just stay along with me for the next few minutes and let's dive into it. First of all, right, let's talk about why this is even a conversation. So why does this matter, right? This matters because most teams treat redeploy, right, to a previous release as a panic button. Right. And that's understandable because like when something goes wrong, the very first instinct is to go back to what worked before. But the issue is that the instinct isn't wrong, right? But the challenge or the problem is that most teams think that it's always safe, right, to go back to the previous version. But it's not always safe depending on the type of application you have and you're running at that point. For example, like you can look at this WebQ worker architecture, right, on Azure. So running this type of application, right, redeploy is not just as simple as going back to the previous version, because as you can see, like you got databases that schemas evolve. Let's say you notice the production breaks, right? You notice the issue in production, and you already have queues coming in, right? For your message queues, you already have new writes to the database and all. So when you redeploy and move back or roll back to a previous version for your application code, like it's not the same, right, as just easily rolling back to your databases. It's not the same. And that guy can cause more like breaking changes and cause more issues in your application. So the real question isn't, can you redeploy? It is, should you redeploy? Right? And that decision requires context, not just confidence in whatever tool you're using, right? But it requires context in, your application, right? And its dependencies, variables, and external systems, right? So without Octopus Deploy, right? Redeploy is easy. Redeploy is very easy with Octopus, right? But knowing when it's safe is the real challenge. And we're going to look at that challenge, right, in this video and look at it from different perspectives and go through a demo. So let's quickly define what redeploy means in Octopus, right? What's Octopus redeploy? So let me just stop myself there, right? So I know the product is Octopus Deploy, and me saying what is Octopus redeploy is kind of like confusing. So redeploy, right, is a feature in Octopus Deploy. So when I say like Octopus redeploy, I'm basically referring to the Octopus Deploy redeploy feature. I know like it means like it sounds like I'm going all over the place, right? But basically what Octopus Deploy redeploy feature enables that when you deploy a release in Octopus, right, you can just go to the Octopus instance, right, our demo instance for this demo video, where a release captures a snapshot of everything that application needs to run. So from variables, deployment processes, dependencies, package versions, and all. So we can go to project on this Octopus instance, right? And we can check out the Invoicer project. So in the Invoicer project, we can see that there are 4 releases, right? So the latest release is 0.04. And if I check out the 0.03 release, I see that I can redeploy this release, right, to run this release instead of the current version like 0.04. Redeploying means telling Octopus to run the exact same snapshot, right, of the release, right, without having to re-execute everything from scratch. So as you've seen, right, redeploy is genuinely that simple, right, from the tooling side, which is why it's very tempting to reach for it anytime you have like a broken release or a break in production or whatever your project is in its life cycle. So now, right, let me show you exactly how this looks like in a real scenario with a demo project. So for a demo scenario, a real scenario, we can go to projects. So for this demo, I've created like a project called Nginx demo. And you can see in this project now, there's currently one release, right? And if I go to the external IP, right? The project is deployed on AWS. External IP that is being served by the load balancer. I can see version 1 all system operational. Let me move this to same tab as project. All system operational, right? So now let's say that the engineering team, right, has shipped a new dashboard, right, and they shipped a new dashboard on and pushed it to Git, right, tested everything in staging, everything looks good, and now it's ready for production. I want to create like the release 2.0. So now I can go into Octopus Deploy, and as you can see, so this project has 2 steps, right? So first it runs the database migration, then it deploys the application. So Octopus has different ways of like deploying applications, right? And different, you can deploy on Docker containers, you can deploy just only Docker containers, right? On any service, AWS, Azure, DigitalOcean, on any service you like, right? You can use Jenkins, you can use GitLab, right? You can use GitHub like I'm using, right, as a source of truth for this application. So in order to focus on what we are focusing on now, right? So you can see the steps. So first of all, run the database migration, and then next deploy the application. So now I want to create like, I'm the engineering team, right? I'm the engineering manager or the senior engineer that is in charge of releases, right? I can click create a new release with Octopus, and then it creates an incremental version, right, of the previous version. Remember the version that's currently live that you can see here, all system operational, is 1.0.0, right? So for this one, I want to name it, right, 2.0.0, right? Then now another thing that is important, right, when making the release, the engineering team like use Git tags to make sure that Git tags, right, to create, to separate like what version of the application, right? So now I go here and then I click on tags and then select the V2, right, V2.0.0 tag of the Git project. Then now once that's selected, right, and then I then save, I can also, one more thing, I can also add release notes, right? I can go back, I can come here and I can edit to add release notes. So I can put a release note here. What will I say release note? Okay, new dashboard and database migration, right? Let me just copy and paste that in here. So this is my release notes, new dashboard, new user dashboard feature, and the database migration I renames a column, right? So I can save it again. And now I have my release ready. The next step is to deploy to production. So now immediately I save that, you see the deployment steps have started. So deploy to production, deploying the release, and Octopus Deploy starts deploying the release, right, to the AWS cluster that I had, the AWS EKS cluster that I have, right, running. So you can see the deployment steps, the task summary. You can see the log of each deployment step. We'll go into the logs, right, very soon. And the process is starting. So it checks, okay, this is my demo deployment cluster. Checks that, this cluster is actually working and this cluster can be used to deploy, right, on Octopus. Octopus can use this the cluster to deploy. And then it runs the database migration that I talked about, that's in this demo. And then it deploys the application. And just a few seconds, it deploys the application. Right, so now this application is deployed. Everything looks good, right? So it shows a successful deployment, green across the board. Everything looks good, right? So now, in some cases, right, when you deploy an application to production, something can break. And as we can see in this demo, right, it returns a 500 error because the second release, right, the version 2 of the application, there was a breaking change in the application, right? And now, most real world scenarios, everything from the infrastructure side, right, looks fine, everything looks fine, but it's possible that the application code can be broken along the way after staging. Maybe there's a variable change, maybe there's a change in the database schema, maybe there's a change that like wasn't kept track on, right, from let's say you have a team of 4 developers and a change was made last minute that broke, that wasn't carried over, right, in the last commit before the release was created. So there are several scenarios that can bring about this error, right? And you see the version 2, everything looks green, but it's broken. So now what would I do? The first step, right, the real world scenario of rollback, right, to redeploy in Octopus is to go back to the previous version. So we can come back here again and refresh and see that it's still broken. The load balancer is still broken. The external IP, right, is still broken. We can see the error it can't get the new dashboard from this release that was added. So now with Octopus, right, I can go back to releases and go to the last working version, which is version 1.00, right, 1.0.0, right? And then, just like I showed you at the beginning of demo, right, or just a few seconds ago, right, you can just come here and you can click redeploy. And then once you click on redeploy, Octopus deploys the exact snapshot, how it was of the previous version, the previous working version, right? And deploys it in a few seconds. There's no re-execution, right? In order so there's no pulling of the recent commits and seeing that you've already tagged, right? In this case, engineering leader has already tagged the project with Git tags and I'm pulling from that exact tag, right? From GitHub, and it runs the database migration, right? And deploys the application. And after a few seconds, we can, should be able to show. And we can look at the raw logs, right? We can look at the raw logs in this case. Let me scroll down a bit. So we can look at the logs. Yeah. So we see run database migration completed for this working release, right? Release 1.0.0, release version 1, right? So then we can go back to the application and we see that all systems is operational. So that release has been deployed. You redeployed. The pod has been recreated, and we can see that all releases you can see that the application is back to the previous working version. So now that's how easy Octopus Deploy enables you to roll back, right? To redeploy the previous release once it meets the context. Remember, like, you have to make sure that your application can, there's no breaking change, right? When you redeploy this, there's not, let's say you have a database like mentioned, right? Or schema or queues, with messages coming in, and, and the change that's broke, right, doesn't affect those data that's coming, right? Or the data that is going, or data that's been deleted, read writes, and all that, right? So as you can see, Octopus Redeploy just works with one click. So that's the power of Octopus Redeploy, right? It's so fast, it's simple and straight to the point, and you can move from one release version to the other, right? When you have breaking changes, and you can make sure that your users don't have any don't have any bad experience while using your application. So now you've seen how Octopus Redeploy works, right? How Redeploy works in Octopus. And, but the important question now, right, is what we've mentioned, the decision making. When should you redeploy? When should you fix forward? All right. And that's what I want to talk about in this section. So redeploy or fix forward. So it all depends on context, right? And, just to show you that our demo that we did, it worked, right? But if you look at the demo again, you will notice that it shouldn't work, right? Because we're running let me show you. Let me go back to the release. So the release 2.4 that 2.00, right, that broke, right? If you look at the release notes, right, so we are running a database migration that renames a column in our user table. So now this worked because this is a demo environment with not a real database, right? So this is just a demo environment. It's not a real database. But in this situation, right, if there was a real database, right, it would have broken, right? And now that brings us to, like, let's go over some questions or scenarios, right? So now, when you're thinking about redeploying, or when you're thinking about fixing forward, right, you can ask yourself this question, right? Did the new release have a database change? Or like what other external services, right? Are there any messages in the queue, right? Another question you can ask yourself, right? Was that database change additive, or it was a column rename that we did? If it was a new addition, there's no issue with that because it's still same column and all, right? But seeing that it was the entirely rename of a table with a real database, right, that migration, the redeploy, going back to the previous release, will break the environment, so break in production. So you can see how the issue is not in the tooling, right? The problem is not in the tooling, but it's the context, right? And that's why, like, it's important to know when and when not to, right, use a redeploy feature, when not to roll back. So now another thing, right? So was this a right call for this scenario, which I've just talked about? Think about it. No, it wasn't the right call for this scenario. Like, if we had like a real database working on the background, because we renamed the column that caused a breaking change. So what should we have done in this scenario, right? What would we have done with this application? We should have fixed forward. We should have fixed the problem, right? Issued the bug, the user dashboard, the new dashboard or user dashboard in the next release, not backporting it, not rolling back on the previous release. And this is an important consideration. So now I've been making mention of scenarios, situations, context, and all this. So when should you redeploy? When should you fix forward? So in order to help you have a mental map and an idea, just a few scenarios, I created this table, right? So you can decide based on context. So here are two like scenarios, right? Of like when or to fix forward, not two scenarios, but two situations, right? When to fix forward or when to redeploy. So no database migration in the release. Yeah, you can redeploy, right? And that's our demo, right? The demo that I did in this video, right? Didn't have a proper database. So there's no problem with redeploying, and that's why it worked seamlessly. So now migration was additive only. So you can redeploy. The bugs are clearly in the application code, which you can see in that scenario, right? You can redeploy. The broken version didn't stay for long. So if you just make a deployment and it's not an application that has like tons of users, or it's just a new application, you can easily like roll back, right, and fix those issues, roll back to the previous deployment. So now you don't have a queue, you don't have external services, all that are consideration. So when you should feed forward, and just like our example, right, with a read database, once you rename a column and then you make the release and there's a breaking changes, going back to the previous version, there's most chances there will be a mismatch, right? And there will be an error, and it's more better to fix forward. Now, also significant data have been written, especially if the application has been long-lived, right? Let's say for an hour or so when you figured out that particular break. So yeah, it was a simple application, NGS demo in this like demo, right? But then a real application, it might not just be something that is so blatant, right? That like if I have an error on the home page or something, well, it may be a critical like issue beneath, right? And also in situations where external services have been affected, queues containing messages have already been sent, and so many changes, right? It's just always best to fix forward, right? And yes, it's one click, but it's always best to fix forward. So looking at all this, right, we demoed redeploy, show you that how it's easy and simple to redeploy in Octopus, right? But it's also very important to understand the context, to understand and to make those engineering decisions on when and when not to. So as usual, check out the links in the description below to learn more about like Octopus Deploy, and see you in the next one. Thank you very much.